Too weak, too slow.
I've always loved that clip. It's Magnus Carlsen playing blitz chess against Laurent Fressient. I mean, listen to Fressient's laugh once again when Magnus says, too weak, too slow. So these guys have been good friends for ages. Fressient has been Magnus Carlsen's second in all of his World Championship matches. He is 10 years older, but still a great friendship despite the age gap. And they were playing today in the AimChess Rapid play-in. So it's a Champions Chess Tour event. Normally Magnus would have qualified, but I think he pulled out of maybe the last one or something, so hasn't qualified. He's got to go through the rounds just like everyone else. Now this is his game against Laurent. What would happen between these two old friends? So Magnus kicks off with pawn e4. We get e5. Now we get this Italian game on the board. Sorry for my voice, by the way. The hay fever stuff in the UK right now is killing me. We now get bishop c5. Castles is played. Pawn d6, c3, all very standard stuff. The knight comes out to f6. Pawn d3 bolsters the centre. We get a6 to give the bishop some room. And now Magnus tucks his bishop back. And we get castles followed by rook e1 and bishop a7. All very standard, seen many times. And now Magnus has a choice between two main moves. One is pawn h3, the other is knight b to d2, which Magnus goes for. Now in this variation, you allow the knight to come to g4, attack the f2 pawn. Okay, Magnus covers with the rook. And now Laurent goes king to h8, setting up his intentions already because he's coming off this diagonal, breaking the pin of this pawn. So we get pawn h3, kicking this knight, but it doesn't retreat to the obvious square, it comes here. Very much in line with this aggressive plan to push that f-pawn. So Magnus goes knight f1, really standard remaneuver, also opens the bishop to shatter the pawns, but Laurent, undeterred, cracks on with pawn to f5. Now Magnus, he flicks in bishop to g5. He obviously felt the queen was worse on this diagonal. You know, it can't come to say f6 now. Pressure down the f-file, pressure on the centre. Now he decides to shatter the pawns. Pawn recaptures and d4 played to get some central counterplay. Because we know now that Magnus is going to get attacked on the king side. So we see pawn takes on e4. Very standard move. You open the rook, you open the bishop, all in one move. This rook recaptures and now queen g6. So because of the pin on the pawn here, the g pawn, there's a threat to take this one with the bishop and also threaten mate. So knight g3 covers, but it does set up new tactics because this knight would be on prise if this pawn moved. You know, if you now kicked on to d5, not that it's white's move, then you've got tactical issues. But bishop d7, played by Laurent, great move, finishing development, connecting the rooks. And now here, Magnus plays a really standard looking move of bishop to c2. But it's just not the most accurate for really a very specific reason that we're going to see. The bishop was good on this diagonal, perhaps with the idea of covering d5 in some lines. What should Magnus have done in that position? Well, king h1 was one suggested move. You know, there's nothing too obvious that white should have done instead, but just some kind of different waiting move. But queen g7 was now played, so it comes off this x-ray of the bishop and still eyes down the g-file, and it also from here pressures the centre. And this is where it's a bit uncomfortable for Magnus, is that this pawn is attacked, but you can't kick on or you lose your knight, and you don't want to be capturing here, or, well, again, sorry, you lose your knight. I don't know what I'm talking about. I was going to say you activate the black knight. But anyway, what Magnus does is queen to d2. And I suspect he maybe saw the idea that Laurent now comes up with, but thought, okay, I'm going to allow that because it creates complications. So can you guess what Fressient played in this position really shook up the whole game? Oh, my eye is itchy. So the move played is rook takes on f3. Very thematic sacrifice. And the reason this one is so powerful, you know, it reminds me of some of those Sicilian sacrifices where the rook goes on c3, takes the knight on c3, where the king's castle queenside, is because not only are you shattering the pawn structure, but now you're taking on d4. And you're vacating this square for the knight to come to, plus the bishop can then come to c6, and you can't recapture that pawn or simply knight recaptures, bishop's coming, very, very dangerous. So Magnus, he goes king g2, covers these pawns. This one was now threatened to be taken after black took here, although starting with this move was best. Now Laurent captured this pawn on c3. We see pawn recaptures, and here comes the knight galloping into the position, bishop c6 on the cards, and Magnus goes very, very wrong. So he plays the move in a moment of rook a to e1, but he should have started with it, because now if bishop c6, you can still use the f4 square to go rook f4, and you're just about holding everything together. Another option was even giving back the exchange. But what Magnus does is start with f4, and it's a very ugly move, opening this diagonal towards the king, driving the knight back, yes, but you're also pushing it towards a really dangerous checking square where it can then access f3 once again. And now Magnus just had to go king h2, sidestep the diagonal. He now goes rook a e1, and it's a huge blunder. And he was probably expecting bishop to c6. And if this happened, then the game's still level, because now you can sidestep with the king. Yes, you give back an exchange, but bishop recaptures, and okay, that's quite a nice centralized piece. You're looking here, the f pawn could be running in some lines, although you have to be careful about giving up the e5 square. Different game, roughly balanced, white maybe slightly ahead. But what we see instead is the immediate check. And now you've just got big problems. You can't step to a dark square, or then you get a fork of the queen and king. So the king steps back to the corner, but now knight f3 comes anyway, and if you play the natural move of queen to e2, then after captures on e1, queen recaptures, well, there's bishop c6. So not only have you just lost back the exchange, but now you're losing a new exchange, and black's just winning in this position, an exchange ahead. So what does Magnus do? He goes for counterplay with queen to d5 now played. And it sets up a really sneaky trap, because if black goes bishop to c6, well, now you can capture that one, give the queen, but you're winning it instantly back. Because check, rook takes, the queen has to block, and you get this end game where white's a pawn down, but it should be holdable. Opposite colour bishops, not too bad. But okay, bishop c6 not played. Laurent takes on e1 correctly. Magnus now takes here. This is one of his ideas as well. Hits the unprotected rook. It saves itself, and now Magnus takes this bishop. And again, he's hoping that Laurent will take here, because then he can take on c7. And although white's worse, your bishop down, there are still some counterplay ideas. The black king's exposed as well as the white. This pawn is weak, and so on. But we don't get takes on c2. Bishop c6 is played, opens the queen's defense laterally, attacks this rook. Yes, Magnus is able to now save that bishop, but the queen invades, picks up another pawn, and still this king is in quite some trouble. So king h2 played, breaking the pin, but now knight f3 check. King g2, the knight comes to d2, Magnus goes king back, and now the pieces get liquidated off the board, and black is an exchange ahead, should have a one game, but Magnus starts trying to complicate. So we get queen c4, hits this knight. You can't move it out of the way without dropping this one with check. So Magnus covers from b7, the queen slides back to f7, again threatening the pawn, and you can't even stop it. So the knight goes to g3, the pawn drops, f2 is hit, the queen covers with check. Queen e5, Magnus doesn't want to swap, he keeps queens on, hits those two pawns. We get pawn h5, and h4 is a threat, using the pin against that knight. So Magnus pushes h4, we get queen f6, hits two pawns at once. So king g2 played, you can't save both, and now we don't get this pawn taken, but rook f8 played instead. Very calm stuff, just probing the position. Magnus covers, now this pawn drops, queen d3 back, and really Magnus is just shuffling. Hits the a pawn, but okay, the queen comes, you have to defend, pawn h4, knight f1, we get this check, the king dives to the corner, and now queen g4, offers a queen exchange into a hopeless endgame, also threatens mate, so Magnus checks, but then when the queen blocks, here we see resignation, because you're either taking the queens off, lost endgame, or moving your queen and getting checkmated. So Magnus Carlsen, in this game, he was not only lost on the board, too weak, but also down on the clock, too slow. Some comeback revenge for Laurent Fressient for 10 years ago. However, these were the standings at the end of 9 rounds, so Magnus did finish up at the top, so did Levon Aronian, some other big names up there, and they're now going on to some extra all-play-all games, where you'll then get 4 who go through to Division 1, 16 to Division 2, and so on. I hope you enjoyed this one. To see another epic game of chess, do check out the video on screen, and thanks very much for watching.